Ukraine's deep strike strategy has been bleeding Russia dry for well over a year. But the only thing holding that strategy back was that Ukraine was using long-range drones that lacked the firepower to cause permanent damage. Not anymore. Ukraine has unleashed its genius pink strategy to achieve total victory over Russia. The Flamingo has taken flight, and it's about to end Russia forever. This new strategy combined power with precision, missiles with drones, deep strikes with the utter destruction of the Russian war machine. And we saw the perfect example of Ukraine's pink strategy in action on February 21st. That's when Ukraine's general staff confirmed that it had used its Flamingo missiles to strike one of the most valuable targets in Russia. Ukraine's pink menace traveled over 1,400 kilometers or 870 miles to score direct hits on the Votkinsk missile plant in Russia's Udmurt Republic. The attack was devastating, as highlighted by a frame-by-frame analysis of footage caught of Ukraine's Flamingo missiles tearing through the plant, published by Defense Express. In that footage, we see the Flamingo striking down with immense accuracy, which indicates that it has a guidance system that activates during its terminal phase, which complements the systems used to guide the Flamingo hundreds of miles to a target. Flamingo also appears to have penetrative power. The footage shows one of Ukraine's missiles hitting the wall of a workshop at Votkinsk, followed by two very distinct flashes visible on the opposite side of the building. In other words, the Flamingo didn't detonate on impact. It got inside the target and then it exploded, maximizing the damage that it caused. The blast wave propagated through the entire workshop, Defense Express reports, and it was powerful enough to cause internal structural damage that wrecked the entire facility. This is the new pink strategy in play. A destructive prophecy of what is to come for Russia, which we'll dig into in just a few minutes. Before that, Ukraine's attack was far more successful than Russia would have you believe. Satellite images published by the BBC highlight the massive hole created in one of the Votkinsk workshops, showcasing that Ukraine scored a direct hit on a plant that produces some of Russia's most important missiles. Iskander, Yars, Bulava, and Oreshnik missiles are all believed to be produced at this plant, and as Defense Express reports, the lights were on when Ukraine's Flamingo missiles arrived. In other words, the Russians were in when the pink powerhouses came knocking. And when Flamingo came knocking, the missile arrived in droves. In the wake of the strike, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky hailed Ukraine's new pink strategy. According to Pravda, Zelensky revealed that every missile Ukraine sent to Russia's foremost missile plant arrived in Votkinsk, suggesting that Russia is severely lacking in the air defenses that it needs to stop Ukraine's new weapon across vast multi-hundred-mile swathes of its territory. I will not say how many Flamingo missiles were used this time. I only want to say that some were intercepted by Russian air defense, some were not, and there were direct hits. The most important thing is that all the missiles that were launched reached the target, Zelensky declared. High quality and accuracy are the hallmarks of the Flamingo, Ukraine's president adds. And we saw the results of both on February 21st. But what we also saw was Ukraine achieving something that it's never achieved before. Deep strikes are certainly nothing new for the country. 2025 alone was a year when Ukraine's long-range drones achieved more success than they ever have before, obliterating Russia's oil refining infrastructure in the process. At one point in 2025, Ukraine had taken about 38% of Russia's refining capacity offline, almost solely using its long-range drones. That was a good result for Ukraine, but it's something that could always be made better, which is where the pink strategy comes into play. What Ukraine achieved in Votkinsk was a first for the entire war, even when considering that Ukraine had used Flamingo missiles before February 21st. That's according to Fabian Hoffman, who is a doctoral research fellow at the University of Oslo. Hoffman is part of an institution that researches missile technology and defense policy, and he tells the Kyiv Independent that what we saw on February 21st was unlike anything that we've seen before from Ukraine. The attack on Friday night, February 20th, 21st, marks the first time that Ukraine has successfully struck a core target of Russia's missile industry directly using a heavy missile capability, Hoffman tells the outlet. What was once a drone-heavy strategy has received a major upgrade. Ukraine's plan, as it goes pink, is to start to complement its deep strike arsenal of drones with heavy hitters like the Flamingo to give itself more options. Massive drone swarms accompanied by Flamingo missiles could make it easier for Ukraine to overwhelm Russia's air defenses. Flamingo might also be used to target the most important parts of Russia's defense industry, as drones continue whittling away at Russian energy production and other less protected assets. This is Ukraine's deep strike strategy, but not as you know it. and we'll be going deeper into what that strategy is and what it means for Russia a little later. Another first that Ukraine achieved on February 21st was the triggering of an unprecedented missile alert that rang all across Russia. The Kyiv Independent reported on this on February 27th, noting that Votkinsk was far from the only target for Ukraine on February 21st. A shocking 13 Russian regions issued missile alerts, with some being as far-flung as the Orenburg Oblast, which is located in the southern Ural Mountains and is about 1,000 kilometers or 620-plus miles away from Ukraine. Of the 13 regions, 8 were forced to issue missile alerts for the very first time since Putin launched his brutal invasion of Ukraine. And of all the Flamingo missiles that Ukraine sent Russia's way on February 21st, we only have confirmation of one being shot down by Russia. At least that's confirmation from the Russian side. Authorities in the Chuvash Republic claim they took out a Flamingo using their air defense systems. Another of Ukraine's missiles lost its course, the Kyiv Independent adds, but this is confirmation of what Zelensky said earlier in the video. It's not just the fact that Flamingo has taken flight that should terrify Putin. It's that Flamingo is doing precisely what it was designed to do. Pink is the new black for Ukraine, and Flamingo is quickly establishing itself as the weapon that the country has always claimed it to be. After being announced in the summer of 2025, news about Flamingo and its development went quiet for a short time before Ukraine started to unleash it on Russia. But what we've learned about Ukraine's missiles, which can perhaps more accurately be categorized as a drone-missile hybrid, is that it's faster and much more powerful than the long-range drones that Ukraine used throughout much of 2025. Those drones can typically travel at speeds of between 250 and 350 kilometers per hour, or 155 to 217 miles per hour, which theoretically makes them easier to shoot down than missiles. The number of successful strikes that Ukraine has launched with these drones suggests that presumed ease of defense isn't quite what Russia had hoped it would be. But even so, Flamingo is a far more dangerous prospect. It can reach subsonic speeds of about 900 kilometers per hour or 560 miles per hour, and it can maintain its speed at a staggering 3,000 kilometer or about 1,860 mile range. And when Flamingo arrives at its target, it's not bringing the sort of small warhead that's packed into a typical long-range drone. This isn't a few kilograms of firepower arriving at places like Votkinsk. Each Flamingo has a 1,150 kilogram or around 2,500 pound warhead, according to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, or IISS. So this isn't any old long-range weapon. It's among the largest and longest-range ground-launched cruise missile systems in the world, the IISS says. And it's also been designed to be as low cost as possible. Though Ukraine hasn't revealed the specific cost of production, it's looking likely that Ukraine's new powerhouse probably costs around $500,000 per unit to build, which is well below what you might expect for a cruise missile. The US Tomahawk, for instance, comes in at about $1.4 million per unit or more, and even the longest range variants fall about 300 miles short of the Flamingo. In the understatement of the century, it's clear that Flamingo is an upgrade over Ukraine's drones. And it's this upgrade that enables deep strikes, but not as we've known them, for Ukraine. Before we get into that, if this is the kind of insight you want more of, subscribe to the Military Show. We break it down like this every single week. Hoffman explains what the Flamingo delivers that Ukraine's drones don't, and his opinion matches up with what we saw in the Defense Express analysis discussed earlier in the video. A long-range drone basically explodes at the outer layers, whereas with Flamingo you have a pretty decent chance that it will penetrate first into the targeting and then explode, and then you maximize damage that way, Hoffman says, adding, "It hurts a lot more than when you land a long-range drone." And it's this, more than anything else, that makes Ukraine's new pink strategy such a major problem for Russia. What Ukraine has now is a weapon that's heavier hitting than anything else in its arsenal, can travel so deep into Russia that targets Putin never thought could be exposed are now on Ukraine's radar, and, as seen in Votkinsk, can hit precisely what Ukraine wants to hit even after traveling for hundreds of miles. What Ukraine has done is supercharge its deep strike capabilities. These strikes directly shift Russian positions in the war, the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine points out. Again, we see that in Votkinsk. Ukraine taking out a key missile production line, even temporarily, creates a ripple effect in Russia that turns into a tidal wave once it reaches Ukraine. Missiles can no longer be built. That forces Russia to rely on existing stockpiles for its own long-range strikes. Once those stockpiles are depleted, Russia can't hit Ukraine hard from range anymore. On the ground, that means soldiers are forced to attack defenses that haven't been weakened by Russia's missiles, which in turn leads to Ukraine being able to mount a stronger defense. Due to that defense, more of Russia's soldiers die, adding to the pile of 1.266 million casualties that Russia has experienced so far in its invasion. This is nothing new in terms of what Ukraine is trying to achieve with its deep strike approach. But what is new is the power being brought into play by the pink strategy, where once Ukraine could maybe knock out a cog or two from the Russian war machine, now it can take out entire portions of that machine. Temporary losses of capacity can be made permanent due to Flamingo. Targets that Ukraine's drones can't penetrate, such as the Votkinsk missile production facility, become vulnerable. And suddenly, Putin and his Kremlin cronies have to deal with a new weapon that has already proven it can score direct hits and, even more worryingly for Russia, doesn't appear as vulnerable to Russia's air defenses as Putin would have liked to believe. What this new pink strategy also delivers to Ukraine is massive amounts of leverage for the ongoing peace talks with Russia. Back in December, Forbes contributor Vikram Mittal noted that Ukraine's increase in deep drone strikes seen toward the latter half of 2025 had already been doing a great job of weakening Russia. These drone strikes have broadly weakened Russia's long-term warfighting capacity. They hit at multiple levels, directly targeting Russian forces, limiting their ability to supply those forces, and reducing the resources available to fund soldiers and equipment, Mittal says, adding that Ukraine can use the success of its 2025 strikes to demonstrate how it can hit strategic targets deep inside Russia when engaging in peace talks. Now imagine that leverage, only much stronger. It's not just that Ukraine can hit strategic targets anymore. Ukraine can score those hits with a weapon capable of wiping those targets off the map entirely. State Aviation Museum senior researcher Valery Romanenko perhaps put it best when speaking to Radio NV back in August. This means that if it hits a Russian military-industrial facility, factories producing weapons used against Ukraine, 2 direct hits would knock any such plant out of operation for at least a year. The strike would have a crater about 20 meters in diameter, Romanenko said, adding, "This puts it on equal footing with the Russians." Romanenko also adds that the rise of Ukraine's pink strategy means about 90% of Russia's military-industrial complex is now within range of Ukraine. And with more upgrades, the Flamingo could even be key to taking out the other 10%, which includes the manufacturing plants for the Su-34 fighter jets that Russia has been using to pelt Ukraine with its own missiles. As a side note, Romanenko also mapped out how Ukraine could hit Votkinsk during his August interview. About half a year later, Flamingo delivered precisely what the aviation experts said it would. This is what the pink strategy means in theory. Ukraine can point to Flamingo and say, look, this is a weapon that Putin never thought possible, and one that can degrade Russia's warfighting capabilities in brand new ways. Already meaningful damage to Russia's war machine becomes a massacre of Putin's warfighting capability. And on the budgetary side, heavier strikes mean more money lost and even more having to be spent on repairs. However, there's also the practical side of the pink strategy to consider. For as powerful as it is, the Flamingo isn't a perfect weapon. It can be shot down, as both Russia and Zelensky highlighted in the wake of the Votkinsk strike. It's this fact that may soon lead to Ukraine emulating Russia's approach to long-range strikes, which is to attempt to overwhelm air defenses with drones, enabling its harder-hitting missiles to penetrate air defenses and touch down on their targets. Mittal discussed this strategy, and it's one that will be heavily reliant on production if Ukraine is going to pull it off. We'll get to that in just a minute. First, Mittal notes Russia's combined missile and drone strategy, which it employed heavily during the latter half of 2025, has merits that make it one of the few Russian tactics that's worthwhile for Ukraine to emulate. Mittal points to an October 2nd strike, which involved 7 Iskander-M ballistic missiles, 7 Kh-59-69 cruise missiles, and 21 Iskander-K cruise missiles. All of those missiles flew into Ukraine alongside 381 drones that were launched from border regions, with the result being that 78 drones and 18 missiles, including all of the Iskander-M ballistic missiles, hit their targets. What this strike signified, Mittal says, is that Russia has shifted to an adjusted drone and missile strategy that sees it launch fewer but larger coordinated attacks against Ukraine. By combining these attacks, which happen a handful of times per month, with the almost daily drone-only assaults that Russia has been launching, Russia is able to overwhelm Ukraine's air defenses, enabling its most powerful missiles to break through. It's a strategy that Russia has been using to wreak havoc on Ukraine's cities and infrastructure. Now the pink strategy is set to deliver some payback. What we may start to see from Ukraine is that the country conserves large numbers of Flamingo missiles as it continues to attack Russia with drones. When the Flamingo stockpiles are high enough, massive attacks, such as what we saw on February 21st, are launched, and Flamingo has a better chance of striking its targets. Votkinsk sustained serious damage as a direct result of such a strike, so we estimate that we'll be reporting on Ukraine doing something very similar at some point during the first half of March. However, production needs to keep up for the pink strategy to reach its full potential. On the drone front, Ukraine is well on its way to hitting the numbers that it needs. According to Zelensky, Ukraine built at least 30,000 long-range drones in 2025, so we can likely safely assume it will reach a similar number or higher in 2026. 30,000 drones per year amounts to 2,500 drones per month. Though not quite at the scale of the monthly drone figures that Russia is pumping out, that should be more than enough to overwhelm air defenses in the sorts of strategic locations that Ukraine will be looking to strike with Flamingo. Hoffman highlights Ukraine's production challenge. Ideally, from a Ukrainian perspective, you want to continue to build massive numbers of long-range drones, but you also want to move in a direction where you can complement this deep strike arsenal with a heavy missile capability like Flamingo, Long Neptune and Sapsan, he tells the Kyiv Independent. Assuming the long-range drone production ramps up, Ukraine needs to ensure that it's building enough Flamingo missiles to make its pink strategy viable. Right now, we can't say for certain that this is happening. Back in August, the New Voice of Ukraine said that Ukraine was targeting production of 50 Flamingo missiles per month, which would mean a monthly outlay of about $25 million. By November, the Flamingo missiles manufacturer Firepoint was claiming to be building 3 of the projectiles per day, which almost doubles the production target, though it also doubles the cost. Still, if the pink strategy is about building up stockpiles, as Russia does with its missiles, and then launching them at precise moments when Russia's air defenses are overwhelmed or worn down, then Ukraine is on the right track with Flamingo. After all, 50 Flamingo missiles per month amounts to 600 per year, maybe more if Firepoint is building 3 per day and it's planned to offer a standard production package to other countries, which would see it produce batches of Flamingo missiles covered by the buyers in question, with half of those missiles staying in Ukraine and the other half going to the buyer, pans out. If everything goes to plan for Ukraine, the pink strategy could be a war ender. Russia will burn in places that Putin thought were safe, and every Flamingo that strikes a target weakens Russia inside Ukraine. Frankly, what we saw Ukraine pull off with Flamingo on February 21st shouldn't come as a surprise. Just a couple of weeks before, Ukraine had dealt another blow to Putin's Oreshnik ambitions, and it did it using Flamingo. Ukraine is destroying Russia's missile strategy piece by piece, and you can find out how if you watch our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest innovations. And thank you for watching.